The Canada that's anti-Jewish now and the Canada that didn't want us are not the same Canada. Stuff was going on in Canada, all this crazy anti-Semitism. If anyone watching or listening does not know what's going on in Canada, it's like, it's bad. We're not here for us. The purpose of the Jewish people is not the Jewish people. I deal with this. I'm in the front lines of this. I deal with this front and center. There is a theological tug of war going on in the Christian world that has everything to do with the state of Israel and the people of Israel and the land of Israel. It is a stick of dynamite to Christian theology. There's more Jews in the land of Israel. There's more wealth in the land of Israel among the Jews than ever before. That prophecy is cut and paste, fulfilled. So Christians see that and they're like, of course, replacement theology has to be wrong. So what does that mean about Christianity? Who am I? People talk about not mixing politics and faith. I go the opposite. I say, no, they should always be mixed because they're both addressing the same thing, which is how to run the world.
Hi, and welcome to the Dayna Show, where we discuss in English day-to-day life of Israeli citizens, our concerns and aspirations for the country, and everything in between. I'm your host, Dayna Kaplan, and we're so glad that you could join us. So welcome everybody to the Dayna Show. I'm the host, Dayna Kaplan. Before I begin, I always remember I mentioned the hostages, that we have 59 hostages still suffering in Gaza, and we think about them every day. I'd also like to send my prayers to the soldiers who are protecting us, and they should come home safely and be successful in their missions. And on that note, I want to read the introduction that I have for you, because it's important that I get everything here right.
Can't wait.
Today's episode is extra special for me because it's not just about ideas, it's about connection, memory, and the people who shape who we have become. I've known my guest Pesach Wolicki since before the internet, before smartphones, before hashtags, back when life felt a little slower and simpler. He was my brother's best friend growing up, and in many ways, he still feels like family. Watching the man he's become, a powerful voice for Israel, for truth, for Jewish pride, fills me with deep admiration and warmth. In this conversation, we talk about everything from growing up in Canada to the complexities of raising a family and standing up for what's right in today's chaotic world. I hope this episode speaks to your heart as much as it did to mine. Thank you so much, Rabbi Pesach Wolicki, for coming.
Dayna, it's awesome to spend time with you. I mean, we've known each other. It's over 40 years.
Yeah.
Over 40 years we've known each other.
What's your earliest memory of me or my family?
Well, that's a great place to start because, we'll talk about life in Canada back then. So I was not from Toronto. Right. My family lived in Montreal. My father was rabbi of a synagogue there. And we made a decision for me to go to Toronto for high school because the schools in Montreal were a choice between a co-ed modern Orthodox high school that was not up to the standards in terms of Torah study and for what we wanted for me, my parents and myself. I had brothers who went there, but it wasn't good for me. Or a very black hat kind of Lakewood style yeshiva, which I had been in up until 8th grade, and it wasn't working anymore. So I went to Toronto to go to Or Chaim. And so I met your brother on the first day of school, and we actually became friends, I believe, on the first day of school. Like on the first or second day of school, I met him and Zev Rosen, who, like, the three of us became very tight for many, many years. And because I was from out of town and I lived in the dormitory, the school wasn't really a dorm school. It had a very small dormitory for a few years. It shut it down after a few years.
Right.
And there were only, I think, 6 of us in the dorm. That was the most it was ever at. After that, it was like 3 or 4. And on Shabbat, we would go to just different families. And your family is one of the first families that I went to for Shabbat because I became friends with your brother right away. And it didn't stop. In all the years I lived in Toronto until I was in college and I had my own place, I would rotate around. Instead of just going to all sorts of different random people for Shabbat, I had 3 or 4 families that I just rotated and went to for Shabbat all the time. So I was in your home for Shabbat, like at least once a month for years. Like we were really, I know your aunts, I knew your relatives. Like it was, I ended up, when you say that it feels like having someone as part of the family, it's totally mutual. I mean, I feel family, the sense of family relationships with your mom, with your, with everyone in your family. It's really, and we should also add in that it's not just I was best friends with your brother in high school. We're still best friends today.
I know.
We're now, I consider it one of the, and this spins into like the larger topic of making aliyah and relocating and coming to a different country. I consider myself one of the luckiest people in the world because most people who make aliyah, they leave their friends behind. And you make new relationships, and in a friendship, here's my theory of friendships. I've thought about this a lot because of my friendship with your brother. It was a very special relationship. When you're interacting with someone, even if you're very close with them, let's say someone like you live in Modi'in here in Israel, and you have people who you've gotten to know in the neighborhood, and some of them you got really, really close to. No matter how close you get to them, they know you from when they met you till today. And that's the perspective they bring to the interaction, they bring to the relationship, they bring to the investment. You could tell them about your past, but they didn't experience it. And when you're talking to someone, even if you're not talking about the past, like you and I are talking, the person you're interacting with is the whole scope of me from when I'm 14 years old until I'm 55. That's who you're interacting with. That's who you see, right? And as someone who just didn't know you that long doesn't see that. They don't see the whole person in the same way. So it becomes, I think it's a very deeply spiritual thing, having close friendships like that last a long time. And the fact that I am still in an almost daily interaction relationship with your brother, we see each other around once a week, and we're just still at that level of friendship, means that at this stage of my life, I'm a grandfather, he's a grandfather, but we have this, there's this very deep connection, this very deep bond, and it's a type of love that it's not family, it's not, it's a certain relationship that not everyone, especially people who relocate,
because your lives are so intertwined, and he's so much part of who you are, and you are so much a part of who is he.
So much, and there's no one in the world. There's no one in the world, not my wife, not my parents. There's no one in the world who understands me the way your brother does. It's just
that's amazing.
Yeah,
that's terrific.
It's really something, and it provides a tremendous amount for me. So, and I say it all the time. It's not like I just said this now. You ask my kids, my wife, they'll tell you, I do not take it for granted. The fact that I have your brother in my life on a regular basis is something that I consider one of the treasures of my life.
Wow, that's really beautiful. Pesach. Wow. How much do you contribute your making aliyah to your education in Toronto?
Not that much.
Really?
Now, let me explain. People listening, as of a number of years ago, I heard a stat. I don't know where they got it from, but I believe it to be true. If it's not still true today, then I want to know what the real answer is. But the stat was that Yeshivat Or Chaim, the school I went to in Toronto, and Ulpana, the girls' school and the boys' school in Toronto, had the highest rate of aliyah of any school in Chutz La'aretz. Now, I don't know how anyone would conduct such a study, and if it's real. So I'm full disclosure, I don't know the validity of that statistic. But anecdotally, it feels 100% true.
I know in B'nai Torah, in our synagogue,
everyone's here.
Everyone is here. The shul is almost empty.
Because everyone's kids made aliyah.
Yeah. And so what do you think contributed to
that? If I go through my yearbook and I'm like, Israel, you talk to people from the States and from other places, it'll be like a few people made aliyah. In our school, everybody's here. I mean, not everybody, but a lot of people are here. A huge percentage. It's normal. So it definitely helped and it was good. But I grew up with an awareness of Israel and more than an awareness of Israel. Even before I ever set foot in Israel, when I was a little kid, 6, 7, 8 years old, it was understood growing up, the way we talked in the house, the way my parents talked in the house, that when we're older, we're going to live in Israel.
Yeah, same with me.
It was just a no-brainer. Yeah. It was not, I have never even had a stage of my life where in my envisioning of my future, it wasn't here.
Is your whole family here?
Yeah. Yeah, everyone's here. I mean, I have a nephew in the States. I mean, like there's, I have a nephew in Holland. Like I don't have, no, we're here. The family's here. My parents are here. It was understood to me that I'd make Aliyah at some point. When that would happen was different for each of us. We didn't come as a family. We came individually. But that just goes to show you, everyone came. I'm one of 5 brothers. My parents, everyone came, but we didn't come together. It was just an understood thing that we were going to make Aliyah. So Or Chaim was a very good fit for me. I had already spent a full year in Israel in 6th grade. My dad took a sabbatical. You didn't go to school with me, so I don't know how privy you were to the fact that, like, in high school, I was fluent in Hebrew. The other kids, other than a couple Israeli kids, weren't. But that was because I came to school. I came to Israel in 6th grade, went to an Israeli school, and then went shortly afterwards into Or Chaim, which taught Limudei Kodesh, it taught Judaic studies in Hebrew. So I preserved my Hebrew, and it was kind of, I don't attribute it to the education per se that I got. I attribute it more to my upbringing at home.
Yeah, like your chinuch at home. It was kind of in the air that you were.
For sure. It was just a given that we were going to live here.
Why do you think that there are so many Canadians who are not interested in living here, even with all the crap that's going on there now? Because I think back to, like, after the Holocaust, Canada, there was this book written, None is Too Many.
Mm-hmm. I remember
They took in the least amount of Jewish refugees after the Holocaust. Canada never wanted us to begin with, So I don't know why people feel so connected to living there. I know it's hard to pick up and leave.
Well, that's an interesting historical data point that Canada never wanted us. But the Canada that's anti-Jewish now and the Canada that didn't want us are not the same Canada. You didn't have this influx of Muslims who are really driving a lot of the anti-Semitism. You didn't have that leftism necessarily in the way you do. So it's an interesting parallel that Canada didn't want us and now Canada is kind of turning against us. But it's not. I don't think it's fair to say it's the same Canada. But I don't think that why Jews stay in Canada even though they see that they're look. I think it's much more. People are resistant to change. I feel a little awkward talking about this because I haven't lived in Canada in a long time. And so to ask me why people in Canada, I don't have family in Canada. I know people there. So it's hard for me to, it's a little bit presumptuous for me to say why they're not making Aliyah. But I'll tell you a conversation I had with one mutual friend of ours. I'm not going to name. Okay. Someone you know very well and I know very well. Okay.
Lives there or here?
Lives there, family's there.
Okay.
Inner circle friend of ours. Okay? Someone you know well. Mm-hmm. And it was sometime in the last year, like all this stuff was going on in Canada, all this crazy anti-Semitism. If anyone watching or listening does not know what's going on in Canada, it's like, it's bad. It's bad. And so I was chatting with him and I said, so when are you just going to pick up and leave? Like, it's getting crazy over there. And he's like, well, it's not as bad as what's being reported, which is what you expect to hear. And I knew he was going to say that. So I said to him, okay, listen, that's not really a relevant point. Because the question really is, do you see any realistic path forward where it turns around? Because look at the demographics of the Arabs and who are, again, driving the anti-Semitism, who are exponentially growing in Canada, growing in influence politically, and you see the way the schools are going. So I say, do you see any realistic path forward where it turns around and the anti-Semitism gets rolled back? And he said, no. So I said, okay, then quibbling about whether it's bad, how bad it is on a scale of 1 to 10 right now, you agree that it's only heading in one direction.
Right.
So then the point is then we go back to the original question. When are you coming? Because I said, I didn't say you should come now. I said, when are you coming? And if you agree that there's no way it's getting better, you've answered.
It was very frustrating for me to see Canadians put so much focus on Pierre winning the election. meaning they thought that he was going to be the Mashiach, that if he won, there would be hope for Canadian Jews. And I say, that's an illusion. The situation is so out of hand now. It doesn't matter who the leader of the country is. I don't know why, Pesach, it affects me so personally. You know, I have friends here who are like, I don't care what goes on in Canada. Like, we got problems of our own, you know, like, why should we worry about Canadian Jews? But I guess it's because, you know, it hasn't been that long ago that we had the Holocaust. You know, we've had this situation before. And the people are just sitting here. Not only do they not fight back, they have this they have this once a week. They have on Sunday after everyone finishes working out, they go to the corner of Shepherd and Bathurst and they have this.
And they yell at each other across the street.
And that's their effort. Like, what are they doing to protect themselves? To arm themselves? To fight back against anti-Semitism? They're just sitting there and taking it. And it frustrates me.
There might be things that they're doing. I don't know. But let me just comment where you said you don't know why this affects you so much. Let me venture a guess as to why it affects you so much. So first of all, knowing your family, the Holocaust was a much more present reality in your family, in the kind of culture of your family than it is for most people.
Yeah.
Okay? It was something very, very much, there was an awareness of the Holocaust in your face.
It's in our fiber.
It's in your family.
Yeah.
And I know, and I also worked for your uncle, and so I know your whole extended family. I mean, like, yeah, there's a sense, especially on your mom's side, that's also very strong. There's a sense of the Holocaust. So I think there's that. I think there's also the fact that here's when you guys all started making Aliyah, because you also didn't come as a family, you each came individually.
Yeah.
I remember thinking to myself, wow, that's so interesting. Because you guys, in terms of you guys love Canada.
It was a great childhood.
You guys but like not all Canadian Jews are equally Canadian. You guys are pretty Canadian.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean by that?
Yeah. We had fireworks on Queen Victoria Day.
You guys like Canada. You guys are very culturally Canadian. You know, the Kaplans are pretty Canadian. Not all Jews in the Orthodox community sort of get into the culture of the country in the same way. And you guys are pretty Canadian. I was like, oh, that's so interesting. Like, you know, and so I think that the whole situation hurts you in a way that a lot of Jews, and I say this especially Orthodox Jews, and I put myself 100% in this category, never felt rooted in Chutz La'aretz. I just never, meaning I don't have an emotional attachment. I love the United States of America. In a weird way, I've become a more patriotic American since, you know, even though I live in Israel, because that has a lot to do with my work. But I do love America, but I never felt rooted. And a lot of Jews, again, especially Orthodox Jews, because of the emphasis on Eretz Yisrael and the redemption in the future and the fact that we're not really at home anywhere, we're in exile, this isn't our place, which is all part of the messaging we were raised with. Not everyone takes it in the same way. And I think that you love Canada. There's a part of and it's okay to love that place. You do love Canada, and you love what you grew up with and the Jewish community you grew up in, and you see it. And that Holocaust awareness, I think that it touches you in a very specific way.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm offended a little bit. I think I'm hurt by I feel like we've been. I don't know, lied to about the Canadian dream, that it was they accept everyone there. And I think that I feel like I've definitely been hurt by them, by how they're treating us now. And I'm also I guess I mourn my childhood, or the illusion that everything was just so perfect and dandy back then, you know? And I guess it's just part of growing up when you see the reality of the situation so clearly now.
Yeah, but look, I think that really, to just be honest, I think the main reason people don't make Aliyah is that it's very hard to get up and move.
Of course,
it's very hard to change, and it's easier. Look, we do that in our private lives also. As long that we have some sort of looming crisis. And as long as we have some thread to hang on to say it's not so bad and it'll be okay and maybe it'll turn around, I don't have to deal with it. I don't have to make the big surgery type decision to deal with it. So we latch onto those things, and this is no different.
You know, I was speaking to Dave yesterday, my brother, and he was saying that he thinks the reason people are staying is because of money. They have a great income there. They're reluctant to leave that cushy lifestyle. Even if it means that their security is compromised, they're still going to stay because they have a comfortable life, and who wants to leave that? You know, they think that coming here, everything is going to go down the tubes, and they're not going to have the same standard of living. And it's true.
And I think there's a spiritual component too, where like what being Jewish is. You know, it's funny. I was thinking the other day about how the Haredim, who were anti-Zionist from the beginning of the Zionist movement down till today, their big criticism of Zionism is that it's like a form of avodah zarah. It's a form of idolatry. Like you're turning this into more important than the Shulchan Aruch. And here's the nasty truth. They're right. They're right. The nation and the success of the Jewish people as a nation is the most important thing. And the whole system that we lived by and survived by throughout the 2,000 years of exile, it's insane that as a tiny little people scattered around, always living as a powerless minority, disconnected from each other for century after century after century, we're able to retain our identity is because of adherence to the halachic system. It's true. It worked. It kept us alive that whole time. It kept us connected. It kept us as one people. But in the end of the day, the most important thing as Jews is the Jewish nation, fulfilling its mission as a Jewish people with all the bumps and bruises and all the flaws in it. But so they look at us and say, oh, you're making something the priority that shouldn't be the priority. And our argument isn't we're not making it the priority. Our argument is no, it should be the priority. And I think that for anyone who's a serious Jew, when I say serious, meaning like is really committed to their faith and is really committed to Torah, and they're living in Chutz La'aretz, and they're not going anywhere. They're living outside of Israel. They're not going anywhere. So they have to, everyone who's really devout in their faith wants to always be progressing in their faith, right? You want to be doing something to be strong. You know, I'm going to learn a little more. I'm going to start going to minyan more regularly. I'll start attending the rabbi's class. Like people sort of want to take things on to be more.
Right.
And when you get up and make aliyah, when the spiritual side, the Jewish history, Jewish identity, Torah side of it that drives you to go live in Eretz Yisrael, fulfills a lot of that urge to do more, right? You've taken this big step. But if you've made Israel not a priority, but you want to keep progressing in your faith, so the only way to do it is with all the sort of day-to-day religious stuff.
Yeah.
And that's why you see a lot of our friends who stayed there becoming like more right-wing and more stringent in their observance. And I think that that's because they've chosen that over what's happening to the Jewish people, over the nation of Israel. You hear what I'm saying?
Yeah, I have something to add, because when you just said that part of the reason that we've survived over these 2,000 years, or that we've had the Jewish identity, you said it was because of our learning and adherence to Jewish culture and Torah and stuff like that. I think maybe I can add, I don't think it's against what you're saying, but I think the fact that we've been so hated over the years has also made us stand up and preserve our Jewish culture. Like you look at us now in this amazing, crazy time that we're living in right now. And you see that the world's eyes are on us. Everyone in the world. You know, you can have some hunter-gatherer in Africa. Everyone knows what's happening in Israel. And I feel like not only am I proud and I feel responsible, but we have become the moral compass for the world. the majority of the world hates us right now. And all of a sudden, all eyes are on us. And not only do we have the zchut, the merit to protect our physical country, but also our Jewish identity, our culture, but also morally set the world right. And this is something that happens every few generations or whatever. You might look at it as like a disaster that we're being persecuted or there's a huge amount of anti-Semitism. I look at it as an opportunity for us to like bring Geula to the world, to shine a huge light to the rest of the world. It's becoming more and more obvious to me with what's going on the internet. I mean, the amount of garbage you hear about Israel is unbelievable. But then you have people like you, or I'm not going to put myself in your category, but people who speak up for Israel, they're just one voice. And look how much influence you have, you know? Yeah. So I think that like when you talk about how we were saying before about how that the Jews, one second, I lost my train of thought. But you were talking about how the Shulchan Aruch and the Torah
kept us
going. I kind of think that okay, for sure, that adherence to the laws is very important.
It's the only Jews who lasted.
But not 100%. Let's look back at the Holocaust, okay? I was talking about this also with Dave yesterday. Isn't it amazing how the survivors of the Holocaust, okay, the word survivor, they're the strongest people mentally and physically.
The toughest people we ever made.
Yeah. We are from that stock.
Yeah.
Okay, so the generations after these huge events that happen are people who have a lot of koach, a lot of strength. And I think it's our responsibility to be a shining light towards the nation.
So, well, look, this gets into what I do for a living, you know.
Yeah.
Like you said before, like most of the world hates us. Let's be very precise about it. There's one group of people who is absolutely on our side.
Right, I want to get into that.
And they're the only ones who are on our side in any real way, and that's the Christians.
Right.
And yes, of course, we know that 1,000 years ago, and you know, Christians were persecuting Jews in the Crusades, and there was the Spanish Inquisition. But that's not Jews who see the history of Judaism and Christianity through that are just completely. They're viewing it with Jewish eyes, where we see ourselves as the descendants of the Jews who were persecuted back then. So we look at Christians and see them as the descendants of the people who persecuted us. But what we're doing, it's a misplaced comparison, because Christianity is not a peoplehood. It's a faith, and it's a faith that's changed. And the truth is, today the Christians are our friends. And this speaks to a different point I wanted to make, which is, like, you talk about like the anti-Semitism is an opportunity, and what's kept us going. This whole story is not about us. Okay, we are the tool that God uses. Okay, the story is, we are like, so whether we're doing well or we're not doing well, the real story is them. And where are they going to be? And
who's them?
The non-Jews.
Okay.
They're the majority.
Right.
Look, God gave us a mission, right? At Mount Sinai, right before the Ten Commandments, God, the whole introduction of that scene, the first thing that God says to Moses is, go tell the Jewish people, go tell the people that they're going to become for me a mamlechet kohanim v'goy kadosh, a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. What's a kingdom of priests? The word kohen in the Torah is not just a name for the family of Aaron. It's because you have like Yitro was Kohen Midyan, right? Kohen is a term that means a priest, a person. What is a priest? Someone who helps the flock get closer to the deity, to God, to worship, right? That's the role of a priest. It's a priestly role. So what's a kingdom of priests? It's a whole nation of clergy? No, it means a priestly kingdom. It means a society, a mamlacha, a society, a nation state that has a priestly role. Okay, so who's the flock? The flock is the world. It's very clear that that's our purpose. It's clear throughout Tanakh, over and over and over again, that like there's a pasuk in Dvarim, and the nations of the world will see that God's name is called upon you and they will fear. Meaning they'll have yirah. That is our purpose in this world. We say it at the end of every tefillah, we say Aleinu, right? Everyone raised praying knows it by heart. Aleinu l'shabbat, right? It's 2 paragraphs. The first paragraph of Aleinu is all about how different we are from everyone else. I mean, it literally opens with the words, it is incumbent upon us to praise God that he didn't make us like the Goyim, that they're like this and we're like this, and they're like that and we're like this, right? The whole paragraph, it's the most Judeo-centric, politically incorrect paragraph in the whole davening, right? The second paragraph of Aleinu is the most universalistic paragraph in the whole davening. Everyone in the world will all be serving God together, and all of the false beliefs will go away, and every knee shall bend. And it ends with a pasuk from Zechariah, from the prophet Zechariah, saying that they're talking about a time when the entire world has faith in God. It's the most universalistic paragraph. Okay, it's almost like the opposite of the first paragraph. But those 2 paragraphs are connected by 2 words, al kain, which means therefore, right? What does that mean? It means that the first paragraph is the means to the end, and the end is the second paragraph. It means, why are we separate? Why are we unique? Why did God single us out? In order to accomplish this universal mission. That's what we're here for. We're not here for us. The purpose of the Jewish people is not the Jewish people. The purpose of a priest serving in the temple is to help the flock. It's not him, right? Our purpose is them. Now, right now, it's an unbelievable situation. October 7th happens, and the entire world gets launched into this fight, this fist fight, this debate. And at the center of it all is, what do you think of what Israel's doing to its enemies, right? That's the center of the entire debate. And everyone in the world is in this camp or that camp. They're fighting with each other. They're throwing mud at each other. They're rioting. And they're all arguing. And, some are, and so you look at in Brazil, where there's millions and millions of evangelical Christians, the Bolsonaro supporters, and they're always bringing Israeli flags to their rallies. They're super pro-Israel. And then you have and you have what's going on in Canada. The whole world's fighting over what we're doing. Because it's about, and that they have to sort this out. It's about them. We have a role to play, of course, and we have to continue to, say our thing and do what's right and remind the world of what's right and continue to do that. And the mudslingers will sling mud at us, and you can't agonize over that. I don't care. Let them do that and put out our message, because what we really care about is for them to go, oh, and get it. So when we look at this massive swath, it's not a majority, but a big swath of humanity, the Christian world right now, that is looking at what's going on here, and they're looking at us, and they're looking at the fact that this ridiculously impossible prediction in the Bible, that we would go into exile for a very, very long time, till the last generation, as Dvarim, as Deuteronomy says, and that we would then come back, something that no other nation has ever done. So even if it hadn't been predicted, it would still be incredible. It would still be unique. The fact that it was predicted in advance is what makes it a miracle. That's what a miracle is. A miracle is where God breaks the rules and tells you about it in advance. So these Christians look at that and they see it and they get it, and then they're on the right side of the argument. And the people who are on the other side of the argument are this marriage between predominantly Muslims who believe that our Bible is a forgery and fake, and secular leftists who don't believe that our Bible is nonsense. And mixed in with that, groups of Christians who are struggling with this situation and are rejecting the Jewish people. There's a group with it because the Christian world is now at war with itself over what to think about the Jews.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. I deal with this. I'm in the front lines of this. I deal with this front and center. There is a theological tug of war going on in the Christian world that has everything to do with the state of Israel and the people of Israel and the land of Israel. And look, the existence of the modern state of Israel is a stick of dynamite to Christian theology. It messes things up. So then there's Christians who go back and reread the New Testament, they reread the Bible, and they rethink things, and they become pro-Israel. And then there's other ones who attack them for deviating from the traditions, but they have to reinterpret certain things. It's very complex. It's an interesting situation. We could talk about that if you want.
I want to talk about it, but I want to backtrack for a second because I had a question that I wanted to ask you and get your opinion of. I'm not sure how you're gonna respond, but do we as Israeli Jews have a responsibility to advocate for Israel in Chutz La'aretz? Like that's part of what you're doing now, right? With your alliance with the Christian community. But how much is it our responsibility to keep saying amazing things about Israel and promoting Israel and saying that we're doing the right thing? Do we have a responsibility?
Sure, of course we do. Well, first of all, we have to live in the real world, and information warfare is the predicate for kinetic warfare, for everything else. And
do you think we have a chance with all the millions of people who are on the internet?
That's not how I evaluate whether or not a task is incumbent upon me.
Okay.
Okay, it's not a relevant question for me whether we have a chance.
Okay.
You find an opening, you go. There's messaging out there, look, if you watch my videos that I put out, right? I'm attacking this point, that point, putting out narratives, because we're in information warfare.
Yeah, but I don't think they really even care about what the right information.
They
don't care. The people that are against us, okay. I don't think they care about the truth.
I'm not worried about the people against. Okay, the goal in information warfare, and I've been fighting information warfare forever. I don't know if you remember back in college, I was an activist.
Yes.
I was a political activist for many years. And so I've been in this. When you're fighting information warfare, one of the most important things to remember is that you do not care about your opponent. They are not relevant. That's not the person you're addressing. You're not trying to convince them of anything. What you care about is all the people who are watching and not saying anything, all the people on the sidelines, all the people who are on the fence. That's who you care about. So let me give you like a kind of, if this was like in a space, like let's say I'm back, 30 years ago, or it's more than 30 years ago, 35 years ago, and I'm at York University when I was a student there. And we had all sorts of problems with, skinheads and Muslim students and all sorts of things. And let's say, having a table, like this is the kind of thing college kids encounter, right? Like set up a pro-Israel table, someone comes up, starts arguing with you. When you're looking them in the face and you're arguing back with them, first of all, if there's no one standing around except that person, don't even waste your time. Look at the person like they're not even there. Just ignore. You don't have to respond. But once there's people standing around paying attention, you're looking at the person you're arguing with, but that's not who you're talking to. You don't care about them. They're irrelevant. They don't affect you emotionally, no matter what they say. They're just not there. They're just providing you the material you need to respond to. The people you're talking to is all the people watching. So put that on steroids when you're talking about the internet. And there's a big mistake people make in the information warfare space. You don't even, the person who's actually your interlocutor is not a relevant person. They're like, and I'm choosing my words carefully. You have to view them as transparent. Otherwise you get emotionally attached to that person, and that person is...
You're so right.
They're just not there. No, for sure. This is the space you have to operate in.
Yeah.
So you always have to think about the person who's not sure or who's reading different things. And also you have to feed the people on your side good talking points. So sometimes I have in mind, I know that my YouTube channel, and our videos get like, it's a wide range. Like we had one last week that had 220,000 views, but usually it's more in the 30, 40, 50,000 range on the videos I put out. So anyone listening or watching, go to Israel 365 and
yeah, we're going to post all of the links for everything.
That's where we're putting up multiple videos a week, addressing different issues going on in Israel. But very often what I have in mind is that the person I'm talking to is on my side. Of course my subscribers are on my side. And I'm giving them the talking points so that they
can spread it out.
They can spread it. They can share it. They can argue with someone. They can, sitting around the table at home or in the car with their teenage kid who's watching too much TikTok, they can give them the right information. So I don't worry about what the anti-Semites are. I mean, I pay attention to what the anti-Semites are saying. That's part of the material you have to work with. You have to know what narratives they're putting out.
Do you engage with people online if people are say anti-Semitic remarks?
No.
You never respond to them?
No. Never.
You just ignore everything?
Never.
Do you have any death threats?
Never. I haven't had any death threats. Maybe I should feel left out that I don't. But no, I don't get death
I
threats.
have, unfortunately.
I don't get, but I encounter.
It's really scary.
I do encounter anti-Semitic. Like, first of all, like YouTube comments is one thing that is like really irrelevant. But like, besides the Christian world that you mentioned, I'm also very active, especially since October 7th, in not exactly the Christian world, although it's mostly Christian, but the America First MAGA space, the world of Trump supporters. Are
you a Trump supporter?
Very much.
Okay.
Very much a Trump supporter. And I
got to be careful who you ask. People are very touchy about that.
I think that I will have that conversation with anyone. And no, I'm absolutely a Trump supporter. Not that I think he's some big tzaddik, but no, absolutely. No, listen, I'm a populist nationalist at heart also. It's not just that like I want him because he's good for Israel or whatever. And it's not and that whole movement is much less of a cult of personality than people think it is.
Yeah.
It's a cult of ideas. There's certain ideas that are like you can't deviate. But that world is very torn now also on Israel. There's some anti-Semitic elements in that world. Tucker Carlson is the biggest voice of them, but there's others. And especially the younger generation of the America First movement, even though their parents and grandparents are pro-Israel, they view being pro-Israel as part of like that whole old Republican George Bush style. And so they reject it. So there's that. There's also some bad Christian theology that's become popular now. And there's this mix of things that has led big swaths of the America First movement, which is the right. We've obviously already lost the left. But there's big parts of the right, especially the younger generation, who are also becoming anti-Israel.
Yes.
So I'm very active in that space.
Good.
I appear in a lot of shows in that space.
Can you tell me, Pesach, how you got involved with the whole Christian community? Where did that work come from?
Sure. So,
because that's a super interesting connection to make.
Yeah. So, and I've been involved with it for a long time, much longer than I've been doing it professionally.
Okay.
So back in the early 90s, I was a political activist. You remember that stage of my life. In my 20s, I was pretty much a full-time political activist in a number of different roles. And one of the roles that I had from 1994, 95, that range, was I was running the campaign for Israel's missing soldiers. Remember the Israeli MIAs?
Yes.
So I worked for the families of the Israeli MIAs, running the nonprofit here in Israel. And basically I was a full-time activist, right? I would do rallies, write op-ed pieces, fly to Washington to meet with this one or that one, and putting out information. And during that time, it was the beginning of Oslo. It was the beginning of the whole quote-unquote peace process. And we were having a really hard time with Israeli elected officials on the missing Israeli soldier issue, because left-wing Israeli elected officials who were really pushing hard on this peace process Oslo thing, this is the Rabin administration, those years. So actually, he got assassinated. Oh, it was right after that. It was right after I left the job. Okay, so yeah, it was during the Rabin administration. So the left-wing politicians, when we would go to them, what we were pushing for in those years was the negotiations were going on with Yasser Arafat, with the PLO, the whole beginning of Oslo. There were also some negotiations via the Americans, briefly with Assad over the Golan Heights. They didn't really go anywhere, but there was some shuttle diplomacy going on then also. So we saw this as an opportunity because the missing Israeli soldiers, well, 3 of them, the ones from Sultan Yaqub, had been taken by a PLO-affiliated group. They'd been also brought into Damascus at one point, and we had some intelligence information that we knew that Yasser Arafat and Hafez Assad both had information about them. So what we were lobbying for with the Israeli elected officials was demand the information from them as a confidence-building measure in the peace process. You're always looking for things you can give that in a preliminary way. Now, to left-wing politicians, they didn't want to demand anything because they didn't want anything holding up the process. We would go to right-wing politicians and they'd say, we don't want confidence-building measures. We don't want this whole process to move forward at all. So no one wanted to help us. It was a tricky situation. And in the middle of all this, I was in the office in Jerusalem one day. This is like 1994, 95. it was 94, and some Christians walk in. And they were with the International Christian Embassy of Jerusalem. Now, back then, in the early 90s, it wasn't like today where so many people, there's so many Jewish organizations that are working with Christians, and there's a lot of friendships and cross-pollination, and like Christian Zionism and cooperation with Jews is now mainstream. It was not like that. No one, this is before Christians United for Israel with John Hagee and all that, there was almost no interaction at all between Jews and Christians. And there was this, and these guys walked into the office and they said, listen, we heard about your cause. We've seen what you're doing. You know, this is back with the dog tags and everything. And they were like, we want to help you. So I was like, why do you want to help? And they said, well, this is a great issue for us because at the time, Christian Zionism was still kind of trying to build its credibility. And they said, listen, we don't want to take any political positions, right or left. Your issue is not right wing or left wing. I was like, which is exactly the problem we were having. They said, so it's a perfect issue for us because it's about soldiers. It's a good issue we can promote in the Christian world. So we'd like to work with you. So we started like translating our stuff into different languages. One of the guys was German. He translated everything into German, and we started working with these Christians, helping us out on the missing Israeli soldier issue. And I was very uneasy because I was like, Christians, like at the time, it's like all they want to do is convert us. What the heck, you know? I was like. I spoke to my dad about it. Like, what do you think? He's like, well, you know, you got to be careful. Like, and I just started hanging out with these people. And at the same time, I should add, I always learn. I was learning a few hours a day before I would go to the office. And I started like learning up more on Christianity. And I read a passage in the Rambam around that time. There's a passage in the Rambam that knocked my socks off, and it's become one of the most important texts in my life. Whenever I speak, especially to Jewish audiences, I read it and we study it. The Rambam, in his Mishnah Torah, in his legal work, where he's talking about the Mashiach, he goes off on it looks like it's not a tangent, but he in the context of talking about who's, you know, the qualifications to be the Messiah, he has a little discussion about why we don't believe in Jesus. And he explains why Jews don't believe that Jesus is the Messiah and all the bad things that happened as a result of Christianity. And after talking about all the negative stuff, he then says, however, God's thoughts are not our thoughts, God's ways are not our ways, and the entire purpose of Christianity, the sole purpose of Christianity, that's his words, this is a quote, the sole purpose of Jesus and all those who followed him, and he says, and Muhammad, but that's a separate topic because that whole passage is about Christianity, both the previous paragraph and the paragraphs that follow, and there's a lot of discussion in scholarship on the Rambam about why he throws Muhammad into that line because it doesn't fit contextually. That's not our topic right now.
What does he call him? Muhammad?
He just calls him the Ishmaelite who came later.
Okay.
That's what he calls him.
Okay.
The Ishmaelite who came later. But he says the entire purpose of Christianity is to pave the path for the coming of the Messiah and to lead the entire world to serve Hashem together. That's the purpose of Christianity, according to Maimonides, Rambam, who held that Christianity was idolatrous. But he says the purpose of Christianity is to lead the whole world. And he says, how so? He says, well, because of Christianity, there's all these people all over the world who know the Tanakh, they know all the prophecies, they know all about the concept of Messiah, they know about the concept of Torah and mitzvot. And even though, this is what he writes, I'm almost quoting him, by the way, I'm paraphrasing what he says there point by point, because I've read it so many times. He says, and even though they misinterpret it, and even though they have their own interpretations that are wrong, when the real Messiah actually comes, they'll understand the mistakes that they made and and everything. Now, I remember reading it. I remember where I was. I remember reading the words and going, whoa. Because what's he saying? He's, you know, in the 12th century, medieval Catholicism, crusades, persecution of Jews, like the relationship of Judaism and Christianity is kind of like the relationship of Jews to the Gestapo at that time, right? And he's saying, yeah, it's been bad. And yeah, they've done bad things for us, and we don't believe in the guy. But the entire purpose of this whole thing is to teach them all about the Tanakh. Yeah, they're going to misinterpret it. They'll persecute us. But because they know the Tanakh, they know all those prophecies, you know what's going to happen? When the actual redemption actually starts happening, they're going to go, oh, and they're going to realize it and they're going to understand it. If they didn't know the Tanakh, they wouldn't understand it. You would not have millions of Christians all over the world pointing at Israel going, oh my gosh, that's the ingathering of the exiles that's talked about in Deuteronomy chapter 30 and in Zechariah chapter 8 and in Isaiah chapter 2. That's it. That's the Jewish people are coming back. They wouldn't have that biblical sensitivity if not for Christianity. So even though for a long time it was bad, the Rambam himself says when the actual redemption comes, the Christians are going to they're going to be in the picture there.
How do the Christians feel when you tell them this?
They love it.
Really?
Yeah, for sure.
Do they see themselves as being there when we're out of exile and we do they see themselves as returning to Judaism?
Not returning to Judaism. It's not about returning to Judaism. It's about making adjustments to the theology.
So if you're like, what's the word, proselytizing this to them now?
Listen.
So if you're sharing with them this information, this idea, why wouldn't they now like start to make the change? You know what I'm saying? Like, does it have any effect on where they are now?
Well, first of all, it's not my goal. My goal isn't to make them. I want them to be good Christians. I want them to be really good, devout Christians. But replacement theology, the belief that was the dominant belief in Christianity for most of the last 2,000 years, the idea that God is done with the Jews and that the church has replaced Israel, that's got to go. It's actually not in the New Testament anywhere. A lot of Jews think it is. They think that, but it's not. On the contrary, it's a much cleaner read of the New Testament that the Jewish people will return and will reconstitute themselves, and that Christians are supposed to be attached to the Jewish people. So there's what's happened is, as a result of the founding of the state of Israel, there's been this like that's why I said earlier that there's this internal debate going on in Christianity about how to understand Israel. Because if the Jewish people are the Jews of the Bible, and we've returned to our land, that means that we do have a covenantal relationship and God's not done with us. And that means that all that replacement theology and everything attached to it is out the window and we have to rethink things. Meaning, the founding of the state of Israel is not a theological problem for Jews, unless you're like super anti-Zionist Haredi, so they have a theological problem with it, right? They've created but that's a brand new problem.
Yeah.
That's a brand new problem. It's like maybe 100 years old, right? A little more. Christianity actually, and that's why I said earlier that the success of the state of Israel is not just the founding, because the biblical prophecy, the first time that the redemption is mentioned is in Deuteronomy chapter 30, Dvarim Perek Lamed, where it says that God will gather us from the four corners of the earth back to our land, we'll take possession of it, and we'll be more numerous and more prosperous than our ancestors. That wasn't true in 1948.
Right.
But it is true today. There's more Jews in the land of Israel. There's more wealth in the land of Israel among the Jews than ever before. That prophecy is cut and paste, fulfilled. So Christians see that and they're like, of course, replacement theology has to be wrong. So what does that mean about Christianity? Who am I? So there's all this, and then you have the more traditional Christians who are like, whoa. Just because the Jews, politically create a state for themselves doesn't mean that there's a fulfillment of these prophecies, and they're still holding fast to replacement theology. And there's
I can
a lot
see
of,
why it would be a big
it's
issue.
Huge.
And
the Vatican has dealt with this in a number of official documents that have come out over.
Really, what
over
do they
the
say,
decades.
the Vatican?
So the Vatican's position has evolved over the last 50 years or so. Now, I should say also the Vatican does a bad job of getting when they change a position or adjust a position, of getting it down to the masses. So what the Vatican official documents say, unfortunately, does not really inform the mindset of your average Catholic. Okay? People don't pay attention. But in the official Vatican documents, in 2015, they put out a document about the Jews in Israel because it was the 50th anniversary of Vatican II, where they first changed the theology on the Jews. But it also had a lot to do with the Holocaust and the state of Israel being founded. I'm getting into the weeds here. But in 2015, and then there were statements by the various popes along the way that kind of nudged things along, where you have Pope John Paul II talking about how God still has a covenant with the nation of Israel, and Pope Benedict wrote the same thing. But in 2015, the document they came out with actually talks about how it's clear that the modern state of Israel is an act of, is from God and has to do with his special relationship with the Jewish people. And the official position of the Vatican today is, and Pope Benedict, he's the Pope before this Pope who just died. Pope Benedict said this explicitly in an essay that he wrote. The official position of the Vatican today is that you're supposed to proselytize and evangelize everyone except the Jews. And that with the Jews, you can have conversations about Jesus, but you're not trying to convince them.
Where do you think that comes from? What's his reasoning?
Well, he gives his reasoning in the essay that he wrote. I wrote an article about this in the Jerusalem Post when he passed away a few years ago, where I quoted it. The reasoning that he gives is that he said, it's interesting. He gives a reasoning, but there's also, I've seen other Christian theologians give different reasoning for the same conclusion. His reasoning he gives is that the Great Commission, which is the call to all Christians to spread the gospel to the ends of the earth, is meant for all peoples. And that's why the apostles then went out into the world to spread it. They were living among the Jewish people. And he said, but the call for Jews is just dialogue. It's not the same, because Jews already have a relationship to God. It's more about adjusting their relationship to God. It's not about introducing them to God. That's his argument. He stops short of saying a different argument, which I don't know if he would agree with or disagree with, that I read. There's a Christian theologian, an academic theologian, who teaches at Emory University today, very prominent Christian author named Kendall Sulin. And in his most recent book, I think it's his most recent book, unless he wrote one since then, came out a couple of years ago. He makes a very interesting argument near the end of the book where he says, so in the New Testament, it talks about provoking Jews to jealousy. Paul calls on believers in Jesus that through their behavior and through the way they live their lives to make Jews jealous of them. And that's a way to attract Jews to Jesus. Okay? That's what Paul says there. Talk about provoking them to jealousy. So Sulin says something very interesting. He says, that call by Paul is only said in reference to the Jews. And the Great Commission to spread the gospel is said in the context of traveling out and speaking to the Gentiles. And he said, and therefore we see in the New Testament that there's supposed to be a different approach to Jews and to Gentiles, right there in the words of Paul.
Why do you think that Christianity and Islam make such a big effort to litkarev people? How do you say litkarev? To
bring people
into their religion.
Well, the bigger question is why we don't.
We don't want anyone.
Right. So the question is not on them. The question's on us. If you believe that you have the truth, and you have the best way to live, and you have the way that everyone's supposed to believe and live, and you're believing in the right God in the right way,
we don't need to convince anyone.
No. Here's the question: Why wouldn't you have the obligation to share that with the whole world? Right? It's absurd. Yes. Why wouldn't you try to convince everyone? So the question's on us. And this goes back to what I said about us being a kingdom of priests. So Jews think that we don't care about the world because Judaism doesn't proselytize. We're not seeking converts. So therefore we don't care what people think. And that's completely wrong. It's that we are a kingdom of priests. Meaning the laws that we have, the 613 laws that we follow, right? Like, think about internally in Judaism. There's people who are a Kohen. Someone's a Kohen, they have restrictions that everyone else doesn't have.
Correct.
Do they look down on everyone else because they don't have those restrictions? Do they not care about them? No. They have a special role to play. And with that role comes certain laws. There's things they can do that everyone else can't do. There's things they can't do that everyone else can do. Right? There's places they can go that no one else can go. Places they can't go that everyone else can go. Right? They have rules. They're like the Jews. Okay? So we are a kingdom of priests. We're supposed to live this life of a heightened heightened holiness and heightened spirituality and heightened relationship to God as his agents in this world, fulfilling his law that was given to us so that we can fulfill our role as the kingdom of priests. And we have an agenda for the whole world. We want them to believe in God. We want them to accept the basics of biblical morality and have faith in the same God that we do, so that ultimately, as the prophet Isaiah writes, the Beit HaMikdash, the temple in Jerusalem, will become a house of prayer for all nations. That's the goal. I always say when I speak to Jewish audiences, if you're praying for the restoration of the temple in Jerusalem, understand that there's a whole lot more Christians in the world who can't wait to bring an offering in that temple than there are Jews. And according to everyone, there's no dispute about this. A Christian can bring an offering in the Beit HaMikdash without changing one iota of their belief system.
Right, there's not an issue of tuma?
There's not.
Going to the mikvah?
Yeah, there's things they have to do, and there's only certain parts of the Beit HaMikdash they can go into. There's only certain offerings they can bring. But it's in the Rambam, in Hilchot Korbanot, he says explicitly that a non-Jew, even if they have idolatrous beliefs, can bring an offering in our temple if they want to worship our God. He says it explicitly. And that's certainly, so even if you're really stringent on Christianity and believe it's idolatry, which is a whole other debate about what category Christianity fits into, but even if you're the most stringent, you want to go to the extreme and say, no, it's pure idolatry, they can still bring an offering in the temple. Which means according to everybody, a Christian can bring an offering in the temple in Jerusalem, even though they still believe in Jesus and they have the same Christian theology they had the day before. That means that every Jew who's praying for the restoration of the temple, this is, there's not going to be less Christians who want to bring an offering. It's only growing. That means that if the Beit HaMikdash is rebuilt, when the Beit HaMikdash is rebuilt, and you show up there, you as a Jew show up there to bring an offering, there will be busloads and busloads of Christians. You're going to be outnumbered. There's going to be way more non-Jews there worshiping than Jews. If that makes you uncomfortable, then you have a problem with the whole thing. Because when Yeshaya says that the Beit HaMikdash is supposed to be a house of prayer for all nations, when Zechariah in chapter 14, in the last chapter of Zechariah, says that in the future, while Pesach and Shavuot are only for Jews, Sukkot, all the nations of the world are supposed to come. That means that Jews are a tiny little fraction of people. It's really a big goy party on Sukkot in Jerusalem. But we're the kingdom of priests. We have certain things that we're doing that they're not doing. Fine. But our mission is a universal one. Right? We just lost sight of it because we spent so much time in exile. So we kind of forgot about it. When the world's not listening to what you have to say and you're running for your life, it's easy to forget that you have a universal mission. But that's where I love your
approach, your perspective.
Thank you.
Because for the first time, I'm kind of feeling like not everyone is against us, but that we're all pieces of this very large puzzle.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who are against us, but that's on them. We shouldn't worry about it. I mean, we have to put out the right information. We have to keep, growing the coalition of people who see what's right.
But what about what's happening here in Israel? You said you have to forget about whatever. What about the actual war that's happening now?
Got to fight it. Look, my kids are in the army. Like your kids are fighting. My kids are fighting. I have a son in Gaza, in Gaza right now as we speak. I have a son in the Shomron. I have a son who's in basic training. For sure, we have to fight, we have to win, and that's really a big part of it. And if you follow my stuff, I say it all the time. We need to rediscover something called victory. We have to destroy our enemies, and we shouldn't apologize for that. World War II, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, President of the United States, said that the only acceptable end to the war is the complete surrender of the Nazis and the Imperial Japanese. The reason that both Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan, which were both genocidal ideologies, as Jews and as Europeans, we focus more on what happened in Europe. But what happened in the Pacific Theater, the way the Japanese treated the other nations in Asia, no offense to us, is just like the Holocaust. They were slaughtering people en masse, terrible atrocities. They were genocidal, evil regime. And the people bought into it, just like in Nazi Germany. Why did those two nations very quickly become kind of benign, peaceful nations? because they were totally defeated. There was no way to spin it that they weren't defeated. The only way to change, when we talk about, after this war, we have to de-radicalize the population. No, it's that the way the war ends will decide whether or not we have the ability to de-radicalize them. Because if it ends in some ambiguous way, then you can't really de-radicalize a population. People do change genocidal ideologies, but it requires a heavy-hand defeat, full defeat. They have to see their leaders destroyed with no way to spin it otherwise. But since World War II, there's not a single war that's ended that way. Every war kind of gets negotiated and kind of doesn't really end, and the bad actors remain in power. That's the way Vietnam went. That's the way Korea went. That's the way Afghanistan and Iraq went. That's the way wars go now. And it's a moral failing of humanity that we don't defeat evil. Because
we're keeping it on a low flame. It hasn't dissolved.
I think that's, and I hope that we stay the course. When Prime Minister Netanyahu in July gave a speech in Congress, and he kept talking about victory, I think he used the word like 10 times in his speech, but victory, 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 and the importance of victory. And I remember watching the speech thinking to myself, most people watching this have no idea what the heck he's talking about, because we've forgotten about victory. We've forgotten about it. And it's necessary, and it's painful, and it's brutal. But it has to happen.
And we've tried so many times the other way, giving land and making all of these deals. It's never going to work. For us, it will never, ever be free.
One of the most important lines in the Gemara is that anyone who has mercy on the cruel is being cruel to the merciful. And we think that by being somewhat merciful on our enemies, or not seeing it all the way through to not crushing them, that we're somehow being nicer and more moral. And all it means is that we're perpetuating bloodshed, more bloodshed into the future. So
100%. Part of the reason that I was so frustrated about these peace deals that we're making, releasing the prisoners or murderers, is that we're never going to get out of this loop. It's like every time they take a hostage and then we give them back prisoners and they come back out and do more piguim and more terrorist attacks. When is this gonna end? It'll only end, like what you said, is when they surrender completely.
Right.
How close do you think we are for them to do that?
Well, I put out a video last week where I pointed out a couple of recent changes that the Israelis have made in their policy.
I heard the war is going to start intensifying again. Have you heard that as also?
It is. It absolutely is.
Okay. Can we talk about that?
Yeah. So I believe that there's been a major turning point, a major shift in Israeli policy that we haven't seen the results of yet, because it's just been a couple of decisions they made in the last few days, and now they're getting all the ducks in a row in order to implement it.
Okay, let's hear.
It's a paradigm shift in this war. Let me explain. First, let's go to the two decisions that were made over the course of the last couple of weeks. One of them is that, and anyone following what's going on in Israel has probably heard about this, that Israel has set up a second corridor from the Mediterranean down to mainland Israel, parallel to the Egyptian border with Gaza. So the Egyptian border with Gaza is called the Philadelphia Corridor. Mm-hmm. And then sitting on the border with Egypt is the city of Rafah, or what we call Rafiach in Hebrew, which is like a hornet's nest of Hamas. And then on the other side of Rafah, a few kilometers up, Israel now made a new corridor. Okay? Now, Prime Minister Netanyahu kept referring to this as a second Philadelphia corridor, which I think is very important. The Brigadier General Barak Hiram, who's the general of the Gaza division of the Israeli army, in his press conference about this new corridor, said that the purpose of it is to isolate Rafah so that we can destroy Hamas in Rafah. So that's kind of like the official story. But just last week, the Israelis opened up this new corridor that they've been building to the media. They allowed some people in to see what they're doing. And it's currently 2 kilometers wide, but they're planning to make it even wider. 2 kilometers wide from the sea to Israel. It has huge border fences, surveillance equipment, paved road for security vehicles. if the purpose of this corridor was just to isolate Rafah while the IDF goes and finishes off Hamas there, they wouldn't be building what looks like a permanent border. Okay? Why are they building this permanent border there? Like, basically, it's like they've cut off a bottom chunk of Gaza and made like, now here's the new southern border of Gaza. What are they doing? So we all know that there's a whole bunch of these tunnels that lead from Egypt into Gaza, under the Egyptian border, under the watchful eye of the Egyptians. All of the weapons, all of the missiles, all of the rockets, all of the weapons that Hamas has been using, it all came through Egypt. It all came through the tunnels under the Egyptian border that were basically governed by Sisi's son, okay? And Israel knows that it hasn't found all the tunnels. Some of these tunnels are big enough to drive a truck through. They're these huge tunnels, and the tunnels lead into Rafah. And that's why Rafah has always been able to be resupplied. Rafah is a hotbed of Hamas. So what did Israel do? So Netanyahu makes a great decision. He goes, you know what? Let's cut off the whole southern part of Gaza and Rafah from the rest of Gaza, and then clean out Hamas from there. Turn this into a security buffer zone. If they want to smuggle stuff from under the Egyptian border into this area that doesn't have access to the rest of Gaza, so what? They basically neutralize the whole problem of smuggling from Egypt into there. Okay, that's decision number one. Decision number two is that the Israelis announced last week that they're going to start a pilot program that they hope to expand, that they're going to start distributing humanitarian aid directly, that the Israeli army or NGOs working with the Israelis are going to distribute humanitarian aid, and here's the key, in areas that are under full Israeli control, which is also an important point because under the previous chief of staff, Herzl Halevi, Israel was not conquering territory. They'd go in, they'd kill people, they'd come out. They weren't taking territory. And ever since Eyal Zamir took over, they've started, since the end of the ceasefire hostage deal, whatever it was, a couple months ago, they've started taking territory and holding it. So now Israel has large swaths of Gaza that are under IDF control, and they're going to start distributing humanitarian aid in there. The humanitarian aid that was being delivered from the beginning of the war was massive quantities. Yeah. It was not stolen. It was delivered to Hamas. It was delivered into the hands of Hamas is the governing authority. So all these months, the reason that we haven't destroyed Hamas over a year and a half or more of fighting is the humanitarian aid. Hamas, the aid is not just sandwiches and medicine, okay? A lot of the aid is fuel, large quantities of fuel. Hamas was taking everything, using it for their own war machine, using it to recruit, because you get food if you give your son, selling it at exorbitant prices. And they were able, because of the humanitarian aid, they were fueling their war machine in multiple ways. The military, but also the governing authority. The governing authority was driven by the fact that they were the only address for food, for medicine, for basic needs, because they were getting the humanitarian aid. This was all because the Biden administration forced them to. There was a letter co-signed by Secretary of State Blinken and Defense Secretary Austin from the Biden administration, the January after the war began, something like that, where Israel didn't want to deliver humanitarian aid into Hamas's hands. And they signed a letter saying that you must deliver aid into the areas that are under Hamas control. And if you don't, we're going to cut off weapons from you. Okay, this is a letter that was a public letter. So Israel was delivering this aid in. Now, there's still a lot of, the quantities of aid they were delivering were a lot. And even though Israel has not allowed any humanitarian aid in for the last few months, they're working off the storehouses. The estimate is there's about a month left. So Israel's getting ahead of the crisis. The last thing Israel needs is the whole world screaming about starving Gazans. So what's Israel?
Why is it our responsibility?
No, it's good. Yeah. It's good. It's good that we're doing this. We want to deliver this humanitarian aid. Let me explain. This is the brilliance of the plan. So what's Israel doing now? They're setting up zones under IDF control, and you have to go into that zone to get humanitarian aid. So let's play things forward now. Gazans in the northern part of Gaza, under Hamas control, the aid starts running out. There's aid available if you go into the Israeli zone. So masses of Gazans are going to start migrating from Hamas-controlled areas into IDF-controlled areas. What's going to happen to Hamas's governing authority if the people leave?
How do you know they'll let them leave? How do you know they're going to terrorize them?
There's because there's hundreds of people will leave. They'll terrorize some of them, they'll shoot at some of them. They don't want to do that either. They don't want to do that. But Israel, first of all, from a PR perspective, the world cannot say we're starving the Gazans. If it's all available, smorgasbord, go ahead. You just have to come into our area. But what it means, we always talk about destroying Hamas as two things, destroying their military capabilities and destroying their governing capabilities. And that second one's always been a tougher nut to crack. This solves both problems simultaneously. Because what happens? Hamas's supplies are cut off. They're not getting the humanitarian aid anymore. They're not getting fuel. They're not getting food. They're not getting medicines. They're not getting anything. The people who they're controlling only by virtue of their control of the humanitarian aid are now leaving. And they're going into an area that's not under their control. They have no governing authority. They're not governing anyone.
But this is assuming that the only humanitarian aid or fuel or whatever it is coming from us. And it's coming from other places as well.
That's incorrect. Even the humanitarian aid that comes from everyone else, and we're not necessarily going to provide all this humanitarian aid, we'll just distribute it. It only is allowed in when the Israelis allow it in. We control all the border crossings. Meaning Qatar can't send aid into Hamas without us allowing it in. Israel hasn't been providing humanitarian aid. They've been allowing the delivery of it. It comes from other countries. Of course it does. It'll continue to, probably. But the brilliance of this plan is that Hamas is simultaneously now going to be cut off from all of its supplies, either from the humanitarian aid or coming through Egypt because of the new corridor. And they're also going to be deprived of the population that they're governing. And the only way to deprive them of that population is to provide humanitarian aid in an area we control. And that's why I said to you, we want to provide it. It's good. It's a great way to lure the population away from Hamas and destroy their governing capabilities. Because whoever stays behind and doesn't go for the humanitarian aid, you're in a war zone. We're going after Hamas. It'll move the population away from the areas that we want to deal with. It'll take them out from under the authority of Hamas. And it'll prevent Hamas from getting any supplies.
Why is this war?
I think now you put those two things together with the fact that they just announced the other day a massive call-up coming of reservists.
Yeah.
And that's always, they don't do that willy-nilly. These reservists have lives. They don't just, if they're doing that.
I'm really nervous about
there's
that.
There's a major offensive coming.
How do you feel about that your kids are in the war, are going off to war?
I'm honored.
You don't worry about your children?
Listen, I worry. Early in the war, like a month into it, I was in the States. And I was at a Shabbat. I was at a family for Shabbat in New York. And this family has a son who served in the IDF. And he was in the States. And he was contemplating going back to serve and not. And the mother in this family says to me, and we're friends. She says, I'm happy my son's not going back. I don't want him to be fighting. And he's a combat soldier. And I said, well, why not? She said, these words were chilling. She said, I know this doesn't sound right, but no country is worth my son's life. So
it's a valid point.
So I said to her, if you told me that all my kids could survive the war, but Israel loses, I'm not taking that trade. And that's how I feel.
I don't even know what to say.
It's real life.
We're like being faced with like a very existential.
Dayna, I have to wrap up.
Okay.
I have to get going soon.
Really?
Okay, yeah.
You have to go?
No, I do. I have a lot going on.
Okay.
I got to get to
I
the
wanted
studio.
to ask you two more questions, okay? But let's not talk about the war or Christianity for a second.
Sure.
What's your favorite music now?
My favorite music.
Because you were very influential in my music from a childhood.
So it's interesting.
Survivor, Slash, Dire Straits, and Scorpions. A lot of these things came from you.
So here's the thing. I would venture to say that most people in our age group are attached to the music they listened to when they were young.
Okay.
It's a normal thing. And I still do. I also listen to that stuff. a little bit, but AC/DC is my favorite band by far. It's not even close. Me and your brother both.
Yeah.
And like, some people listening will be like, what, AC/DC? Like, okay, whatever. You know, it's, I know their whole catalog. Dave and I went through a few years where the only band we listened to was AC/DC for quite some time.
How cool is it that any song you want to hear, you can hear it right away?
It's crazy. It's crazy. You don't have to wait for the radio and then hit record on your tape deck to capture it.
Yeah.
But besides that, I'm very into what's called alternative rock, alt rock, like post grunge. Alt rock, you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
So it's kind of, I consider it sort of like a guilty pleasure because a lot of it's not very sophisticated, but there's a lot that I love that stuff. I love the intensity, the combination of the heaviness and the melody and I've never gotten Dave to get as into alt rock. I think he would love it if he just,
opens up a little bit.
Because he's so attached to the music
He's
of his
very
youth.
attached.
And I'm not as much. So I listen to a lot of modern, like of from the 2000s on, alt rock. There's some current bands that I follow. It's all
One more question.
That's the music that moves me the most right now.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Why did you get smicha?
Why did I get smicha? Why did I become a rabbi? Interesting question. So, like I mentioned, I was a political activist, and like the missing soldier thing was only one of the roles I had. I did and the reason initially that I decided to learn for smicha. Well, first of all, let me just background. When I was a kid, if you ask the adults in my life what I was going to do with my life, they all thought I was going to be a rabbi. Like, I don't think anyone was surprised.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like because so part of the background is that I was always very good at learning, meaning. I'm not saying.
By the way, I thought you were a huge nincompoop when we were growing up. I didn't know you were so smart. Okay. David said to me, he's brilliant, he's a genius. And I'm like, I thought he was a huge nincompoop.
So I was always, I don't want to say this to like pat myself on the back, but like
No
in high school, I wasn't even with my grade for Judaic studies. Because I was always in whatever.
So advanced.
I was always in whatever the top class in the school was.
Wow.
So like Rabbi David, who was our Rosh Yeshiva in high school, he taught the top class Gemara. I was with him multiple years because I was always in a different category. So I was always very good at it. I was always into learning. Even when I was doing all sorts of misbehaving and partying and all sorts of things, I was always into learning. And I was kind of like halfway there already because I would always, like I mentioned when I was working with missing soldiers, I would learn a few hours a day. That was also in college. When I went to York, I would learn a couple hours every morning before I'd go in. So I was always into learning but I was a political activist, and I really felt that people who are leaders in a public way should also be spiritual leaders. And I don't like the division between politics and faith. I'm opposed to it. People talk about not mixing politics and faith. I go the opposite. I say, no, they should always be mixed because they're both addressing the same thing, which is how to run the world, how to run society, what's right, what's wrong. Politics and faith address the same things. I'm the opposite of saying that politics and faith should be separated. They should not be separated. And I've always believed that. So I felt that it was a consistency that I wanted to learn for smicha. So my initial goal in learning for smicha was to go right back into political activism with smicha. But along the way, I met my wife and I decided, you know what, maybe I'll go into education, maybe I'll do some other things, which I did for a number of years.
Yeah. You were a Rabbi. You were like a Rosh Yeshiva.
I was a Rosh Yeshiva for about a decade.
Yeah, and you had the most amazing videos. I remember I wrote you and I commented on them. They were fantastic.
And I spent a couple of years as a rabbi of a synagogue, and I did some adult education. But I was always out of the box, and always, and also this affinity for Christians, which started way back then when I met those Christians in the early 90s. Never went away. I mean, that became a constant. My student, like when we closed the yeshiva in 2015 and I went right into Jewish-Christian relations, and there were people who were like, what? You're doing that? I would always say to them, the only people who are not at all surprised are my wife and my students. Because my students heard me talk about this all the time. Like this whole universal view of Judaism and the role that Christians have in this has been a part of the way I think for decades, long before I got involved in this. So when I initially learned for smicha, it was in order to get back into public work. But then I took a detour for a number of years in education. I kept up some relationships with Christians during that time. And then in 2015, we closed the yeshiva and I went into Jewish-Christian relations full-time, which is good. But that's why, I hope that answers the question why I got smicha.
Yeah. Are you happy living in Israel now?
I can't even imagine living anywhere else.
Yeah, was the
can't
best
even
decision
imagine.
you ever made?
I can't even imagine. I mean, I made some good decisions, marrying my wife.
Yeah.
Some good ones.
Yeah.
But I can't even imagine living anywhere else. Can't even imagine.
Me
It would be
neither.
like, I don't know what I'd do with myself.
I think it's a huge gift. I think we have a big zchut to live here. And I want to thank you so much for all that you do.
Thank you.
For Am Yisrael, for Israel itself, all your advocacy work.
Thank you.
And for just spreading love and knowledge to everyone. And thank you just so much for who you are.
Thank you.
And for coming here today.
I appreciate it, Dayna.
Yeah.
And for everyone in Toronto who might be listening to this, go Leafs.
Go Leafs, go. I have a Leafs hat over there, so behind you.
All right, Dayna, thank you.
Yeah,
This is wonderful.
Pleasure. Thanks for listening, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of The Dayna Show. If you like what you heard, you can subscribe to the podcast, like and share with your friends on social media, and rate us 5 stars. Don't forget to tune in next week, and we'll see you then.